Metroid was nothing gamers had ever experienced when it was released for the Famicom Disk System in 1986 and the NES next year. Not only could it scroll right and platform like Mario, fire a weapon like those popular shooters in the arcade, and create a long adventure and proper battery save like Zelda, the Famicom version at least, but it could also scroll left, up and down. It wasn't about beating your friend's high score, but you were actually going somewhere. It required more than one sitting to beat, and who could forget the twist ending revealing that Samus Aran was a woman. But despite becoming one of the most revolutionary games at the time, because the Famicom Disk System was a failure in Japan, so was Metroid. However, it was successful enough across the rest of the world to convince Nintendo to turn the early science fiction title into a series. Game Boy creator Gunpei Yokoi was also the producer of the Metroid series and always made sure it was present on every Nintendo system. In 1991, Metroid 2 Return of Samus was released for the Game Boy, and although it was a more linear experience than its NES counterpart, it introduced the gunship and power suit design we're all familiar with today. However, Yoshio Sakamoto, who directed the NES predecessor, had no involvement on that one. In fact, no one really knew what he was doing. But without any knowledge or green light from Nintendo, he went to work on a true sequel, believing that the series wasn't getting the respect it deserved. It took over 3 years to develop. Sakamoto explained that we wanted to wait until a true action game was needed, and also set the stage for the reappearance of Samus Aran. Fair enough. Super Metroid was released for the Super Nintendo in 1994. Now, I've previously reviewed Metroid Prime. Check it out if you want my perspective, but if I have to put this game in one word, it would be masterpiece. There's absolutely no question that if you're a gamer, no matter what generation you're from and you haven't played this, you're living under a rock. But anyway, Metroid Prime for me was the introduction to the cursed franchise. I had no idea there were 2D side-scrolling predecessors until the 2010s. Yeah, like I said, I was practically living in this. But considering I grew up with PlayStation consoles and I wasn't even alive when these games were released, what do you expect? But after reviewing Metroid Prime on the GameCube, it's now one of my all-time favorites, and I was really keen to check out the rest of the series, continuing with what is also considered the queen of them all. The story continues from Metroid 2 Return of Samus on the Game Boy. The baby Metroid Samus spared during her escape of the planet is taken to a colony ship for testing to find out how Metroids harness their full potential. If you didn't play the predecessors before this, you'll get a prologue explaining everything without giving away too much, so you can still play these ones not really knowing what to expect, although this was a huge giveaway. Samus receives a distress signal from that very station to find every colonist dead and the baby Metroid alone. Then Ridley arrives to steal the baby from Samus and sets the ship to explode. Samus narrowly escapes and she follows Ridley through space, which leads to her return to Zebes. And there's nothing, no specific directions, nobody communicating with you, not even enemies, just a few rooms, alone, with the motivation to explore. Then eventually, one step at a time, she realizes just how hostile this planet is. It is the same one as the NES predecessor. The space pirates were able to grow back in numbers and expand their territory. I think of that as simply more gameplay time. Samus relies on upgrades, power-ups and weapons scattered in different rooms all over the map to keep herself alive, and retrieve the baby Metroid larva from Ridley. This is a love letter to most classic neo-noir science fiction films. They obviously used all that inspiration from dark but humble beginnings, but a more superior system means the atmosphere is dramatically increased. And the twists at the end, I won't give it away, it creates a level of emotion that game writers were only beginning to explore at the time, at least not in JRPGs. So in some ways, it revolutionized storytelling in video games despite having no dialogue during gameplay. A perfect case in point of action speaking louder than words, Super Metroid will keep you hooked to the very end. This is technical proof that in the right hands, you can do a lot more with the Super Nintendo over its main rival. Super Metroid is one of the best looking and most moody games on the Super NES. The attention to detail is exquisite, from the eerie soundtrack, what a soundtrack. To the design of the planets and the enemies that stand in your way. You barely see a friendly face, but it's the little details that make it the bona fide masterpiece that it is. There are a couple of rooms where every time you kill these things, it becomes slowly darker. Whenever a missile explodes, some of the enemies fall from the wall or roof, and you know how there aren't any enemies at the start. Once these scanners or cameras pick up Samus, then the enemies arrive. They do so when they spot an intruder. It's also the first Metroid title to have backgrounds. I bet you only just realized that. Even today, lights out at midnight with the volume increased, it's a chilling sight to behold. When you think of video games that have aged the best, look no further. As is with the Metroidvania formula, areas can't be accessed until you find a specific power-up or weapon, and on occasion you'll have to fire at spots you wouldn't imagine there being something. At first you'll be finding new areas to explore. You upgrade yourself with a couple of power-ups, then explore further through rooms until it's impossible to continue. But with the new upgrades, you return to earlier spots you originally couldn't pass. Now you can. You want another power-up or weapon that can be used to reach the next set of rooms, but aside from a few boss battles interrupting the flow, it's the usual trend, so expect a fair bit of backtracking. Save spots are scattered all over the planet, so of course it'll take more than one sitting to beat. What's also new are additional save slots so more than one person can save their progress. Save regularly because the map size is humongous and excellently designed. You'll be spending hours searching for all the hidden rooms and spaces. Zebes has changed dramatically the last time Samus visited it, but according to the plot, the Space Pirates have rebuilt and expanded. They certainly worked at a very fast rate. But with the introduction of the map of the whole planet, at least you'll know exactly where you are, but only if you've already explored that part. Unless you come across a map station that can download almost every location of the area. The first thing you're obviously going to find is the Morph Ball, then over time you'll be armed to the teeth. Every weapon and power up from the predecessor including the Varia Suit, High Jump Boots, Screw Attack, Spring Ball, Missiles and the beams Power Wave and Ice return in Super Metroid. But this new look wouldn't matter too much if there weren't anything new. Firstly, you'll get a few more fire options. The Spazza power up increases the spread of fire, and holding the trigger will give you a fully charged shot. It has to be found first, and it's mandatory in a few boss battles if you're out of missiles. In the menu, you can edit your beam by choosing which type of fire you want. You have to keep switching weapons because, as I mentioned before, most areas can only be accessed with a specific weapon. Like using a super missile to open a door, a power bomb or speed booster to clear a pathway, or the shine spark jump to make a vertical leap of faith. And then there are the utility items. You'll also notice how much the water slows you down and makes it impossible to fully control yourself. Well, the new gravity suit will fix that problem. The grapple beam allows your beam to act as a rope, and an X-ray scope can see through any invisible blocks, which comes in handy if you're new to Super Metroid. All of this may sound overwhelming at first, but everything is easily accessible with the press of a select button. Even the control variety has taken a huge step. Yes, the wall jump requires a lot of patience to learn, but it's a necessity if you want those extra energy tanks and missile ammo. That's the only real problem I have with Super Metroid. As you can already tell, Samus can already run, but she can also shoot on a diagonal angle. It's a little bit harder playing this with a GameCube controller because the D-pad is so small. Strange considering that a Metroid game usually excels with one of these. I recommend using a Wii Classic controller if you downloaded this off the Virtual Console. You have to play it in a long span to get the highest level of enjoyment. It's the sort of thing you should plan on playing, at least if you're new to it, because like any Metroid game, it takes a while to understand what's going on. But that's how it should be done. Samus Aran is on a planet without much explanation at first, and you, the player, are feeling the same. You just don't make AAA titles like these anymore. On occasion, a boss will appear, and the difficulty balance from start to finish is set correctly. Some of them are returning ones from the NES title, who knows how and why, and they even sound like the monsters in Godzilla movies. It feels mostly like a walk in the park, just exploring the planet, and then the boss battles provide the real challenge. It's all about figuring out the exact way to defeat them. Because they appear unexpectedly, did I mention save regularly? This part surprisingly took me a while to figure out. That's what happens when you're alone. You're not given any direction or advice. You have to work it out yourself, so you're gonna get stuck every once in a while if this is your first time playing it. You're more likely to find missile ammo or energy tanks by accident. but somehow, even for first timers, it's not that insanely cryptic. A walkthrough is surprisingly unnecessary, and because you have a map this time, you know where you are all the time. Now at first, completing 100% is the only replay value you'll get in Super Metroid. That doesn't sound like much. But like the predecessors, Samus is out of her power suit if you complete 100% in less than 3 hours. And since this is the first time I've ever played this, of course it doesn't happen. I don't even understand how it's possible. You'll want to complete everything, because you'll be fully prepared for the final boss, and it's a fun game all things considered. It always takes a bit of effort just to stop playing, even if you're stuck. Metroid on the NES was a revolution. Super Metroid perfects everything. It feels more like a reboot than a sequel, like it takes a gigantic leap forward. Just everything about it comes together perfectly. The word super in the title couldn't be more appropriate in this. Super Metroid gets a 10 out of 10. It's one of the best games on the Super Nintendo, and with so many masterpieces released for that system, that's one hell of an accomplishment. The biggest travesty of all this, it was a commercial flop back in 1994. By that time, the Super Nintendo was late in its life cycle, and the developers took too long, even if it was worth the effort. Although it sold around 1.5 million copies, it was completely overshadowed by releases of Donkey Kong Country, Final Fantasy 6, and the upcoming PlayStation. Nintendo barely had any faith in it despite being one of the best games the company has ever produced. And because producer Gunpei Yokoi was tragically killed in a car accident a few years after Super Metroid's release, the series was in an even bigger limbo than today, and we wouldn't see another Metroid game until Fusion and Prime came out on November 2002. They miraculously matched the critical acclaim Super Metroid reached. It's no wonder physical copies of this game cost so much today, but to anyone who's watching this and has a Super Nintendo, it's worth it. And if you want to save money, get it off the Virtual Console. Either way, just play this game if you haven't yet. The combination of atmosphere and gameplay on a 16-bit system, you don't know what you're missing out on. It's a landmark of video gaming.